All right, so we are going to finish our notes on World War I. So yesterday we looked at the causes. Today we're going to look at warfare in World War I and also the end of the war. So a couple of events during World War I. So when we left off yesterday, again, we talked about the causes. So we talked about militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, finally setting off the spark that starts World War I and sets those alliances into motion. And so we were looking at the different war fronts that the powers are going to be fighting. And we said that, or on which the powers are going to be kind of fighting. So we have our two sides here. We have the Western Front, right, between France and Germany. And then we have the Eastern Front. And these are going to be our main focuses here between Russia and Germany right here. So again, these are going to be our main focus. And you'll see when we left off that Germany, if you remember, is kind of facing a problem here because they are sandwiched in between Russia and France, which are two allied powers, right? And then you have the United Kingdom to the north. So Germany's got to find a way to successfully fight this war that isn't on two fronts, meaning they don't want to fight this side of the war and this side of the war on the Western and Eastern Front at the same time, because then they're going to have to split their military, right? So this is a problem for the German military. So what Germany does instead is they come up with a plan. You need to know what this is called. It's called the Schlieffen Plan. It's named after the guy who came up with it. So what they were hoping is that they were hoping to quickly attack France and turn around and then fight Russia. Okay. So at this time, Russia's obviously still larger. So they were hoping to eliminate France quickly and then turn around and fight Russia individually. So then they don't have to split their forces. So it's kind of like a quick war. Remember, a lot of people anticipated this being very quick. So after their victory, after they quickly attack and defeat France, they can turn back and fight Russia. The war doesn't work out that way. So Germany is going to have to fight a two-front war. The Schlieffen Plan is unsuccessful. Some of the things that they're facing in World War I are things like trench warfare, which we're going to talk about, causes a stalemate. And both sides, the Allied and the Central Powers, both have the same technology. So airplanes in this case, again, not used the same as today, but used to kind of see where your enemy is, right? Machine guns, you can cut down your enemy much faster. Mustard gas, biological warfare, tanks, right? All of these things are enhancing warfare. We've never used these types of technology in warfare before at this point. And what's different about World War I is not only that is it a global conflict, but we're not just fighting war necessarily on the battlefield anymore. It's coming into towns and people's homes and destroying major cities. And we're going to see that with World War II as well. So it's not, again, confined to the battlefield anymore. It's in your backyard. And this is what makes World War I and World War II so devastating. So we said trench warfare, right? So trenches, they were dug into the ground, of course, to protect from machine gun fire, to protect your military. And you can see from overhead, this is a picture from an airplane. This is what the trench looked like, right? But oftentimes in the trench, you could face a stalemate, right? They call it going up and over the trenches. And the reason why it was difficult to go up and over the trenches is because as soon as you do, right, you face machine gun fire. So it's really hard for either side to make any kind of headway. So you'll see that there's this land in between right here that the pointer is pointing to. This is called no man's land, right? This is the part where you want to cross, but you can't because it's very difficult because of the new military warfare. You guys are actually going to look at some of that today. And the conditions in the trenches were unsanitary, right? So if it rains, you're standing in water, which is something called trench foot. And so it basically causes really bad fungus and mold on your feet. And the mustard gas and things that people were experiencing, again, if you're in the trench, you can't really escape it. That would cause your skin to bubble. Also, if you breathe it in, it's deadly, obviously. So causing unknown, at first, unknown long-term effects for people, if not death. But these, again, are new forms of warfare that this is what brings World War I to a stalemate, meaning like this is why it's going on so long, because neither side, again, can make progress due to the types of military technology that both sides possess. All right, so our war is also going to spread into the colonies. So there's a lot of fighting in other parts of the world. We said in other parts of Southeastern Europe and Asia as well. There's fighting over the colonies in Africa. Japan, which we'll talk about this when we get to World War II, is going to join on the side of the Allies as well. Japan is imperializing and trying to extend their empire at this point. So Japan joins the war on the side of the Allies in hopes that when they win, or if they win, they get a share in the spoils of war, meaning they hope that they get some territory from that. So we're going to talk about that when we get to the Treaty of Versailles. And then we see that, again, like people are using the militaries within their colonies, like the British are using the Indian military to fight beside British troops as well. All right, so after a few years, we're going to see that the U.S. obviously didn't join the war right away. And so we're going to look at some reasons just why the U.S. decides to finally join in. So first of all, Germany, we hadn't used submarine warfare before. Germany is starting to use unrestricted submarine warfare. Basically, this means that they are sinking any and all ships that come into British waters. They were attempting to kind of cut the British off, right? And this meant anyone. It doesn't matter if you're allied with the powers or not. And at this time, in 1915, the U.S. is not allied with Britain in the war in that sense. They're not aiding them in any way, at least not formally. So on May 7th, 1915, there was a passenger liner, meaning it's carrying civilians, right, innocent people, to Great Britain. And it was sunk by a German sub, so killing a little over 1,000 people, and 128 of those ended up being American citizens. So this is the first kind of attack on the United States, or indirectly kind of attacking the United States. Later on, it's going to come up that there were actually weapons on the ship as well that the U.S. was sending to Great Britain. The Germans may have suspected that, but obviously that wasn't necessarily known to the public at the time. And then finally, the Zimmerman Note. This is the final push that brings the U.S. into the war, right? Because we know, at least if you know anything about World War I, the U.S. is on the Allied side, the winning side after World War I. And the Zimmerman Note was Germany's attempt to distract the United States to not join the Allies. They were hoping that if they incentivize Mexico enough to invade the U.S., then it would distract the United States from the war in Europe. Germany could hopefully end the war, and then reward Mexico in some way at the end. But the note is intercepted by the U.S. government, and so the U.S. takes this as a direct threat against the United States, and so the U.S. finally joins in on the war on the side of the Allied powers and declares war on Germany. All right, so what we have during World War I mentioned earlier, is a state of total war. So total war means that all the resources in your country are dedicated to the war effort. Okay, so this, for a lot of people, included rationing, meaning that you save a certain amount of goods, or you only consume a certain amount of goods to make sure that you help the war effort. You're not over consuming things so that those resources can be dedicated to the war. There's also propaganda that both sides are using. So we'll see the Allied and Central Powers. We're going to look at a couple of examples of propaganda, which is, we've talked a little bit about propaganda in the past few units, but we're going to see a lot more of it, especially here during this wartime, that it's one-sided information that's meant to persuade people to think or act a certain way. So in this case, you see like Britain wants you, right, to join your company's or your country's army, and then you hear like God save the king, so fight for the king, right? So again, like kind of harping on that feeling of intense nationalism, like you need to join the war, you need to defend your country. So it's meant to help convince citizens to join the war effort. Okay, so from the Central Powers, we have some German propaganda here, right? And there's a lot of religious images you'll see in World War I propaganda as well. So you can see the angel here. Leading the Germans, Russian propaganda, again, striking down, the Germans as well. You can see the British trying to get Irishmen, which is part of the UK at the time, to join the war effort, join the regiment. So, avenge the ones that you lost on the Lusitania. And then for American propaganda, you can see like, for boys 14 to 18, this is a training camp in hopes that after the training camp, when they're old enough to finally enter the war effort, they do so. Here's some for rationing. British coal, right? We know that coal at this point is used to fuel industry. Industries are the ones that are producing a lot of this military technology. So it says, if for everyone in the kingdom, a piece of coal as big as your fist is saved daily, nearly 8 million tons would be saved in a year. So saving up the coal just in case they need it for the war effort, for the industry again. So this is an example of, encouraging people to ration. So don't use up all the resources. And in America, they actually issued something called Liberty Bonds. So you can see here, here's Uncle Sam's hat and the Liberty Bond. And then this is the German Kaiser's hat, or a German military hat as well. But Liberty Bonds were basically loans or that you could give to the government. So you could give the government a certain amount of money, and the government promised to pay you back in a certain number of years with interest. Okay, so this is the low example, but like $20 to the government to help the war effort, and then in a couple years they're supposed to pay you back with that $20 with interest. So in addition to what you had, the interest you had compounded. Okay, so it's basically saying like which one choose, or choose your country or choose Germany. All right, so finally, because of the aid of the U.S. on the Allied side, we're going to see that the Allies actually reach a victory. So this comes in with a couple of events. So in 1918, in March, the Allied powers unfortunately face Russia withdrawing from the war. We're going to talk about this more in the coming days, but because Russia is facing a revolution and the revolutionaries are successful in overthrowing the traditional Russian government, Russia is going to withdraw from the war. So they're going to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which basically makes peace with Germany. So Russia is going to withdraw. The United States is going to kind of take or assume this role in Russia, or that Russia was playing along the Allied powers, to kind of take their place. And then our final push is the Second Battle of the Marne. I'm not gonna ask you guys to know too many battles, but in May 1918, this is when the Germans make their final effort to push towards Paris, hopefully knock out France, a major Allied power, and the Allied troops launched a successful counterattack with U.S. troops. And this is what makes, again, the fresh troops, the fresh supplies, this is what makes the Allied power successful. And finally, Germany withdraws from the war because the Kaiser steps down. Okay, so their leader, their king steps down. And so they sign an armistice, which is a ceasefire, on November 11th, 1918. So the war is officially over. So you guys are going to do an activity on this as well. The Treaty of Versailles, I believe you're going to do one tomorrow. But with the Treaty of Versailles, at the end of every war, right, the winners kind of get to decide what happens in the terms on which the war is ended. So when we get to the end of the war, our major Allied powers are America, and then we have France and Britain. And America, or the United States, has different ideas about what they consider a good peace agreement, as opposed to France and Britain. So remember, France and Britain have been fighting this war against Germany for a lot longer. And so there's a lot more animosity between these powers in Germany than there is between America and Germany. And also Woodrow Wilson makes some fair points. So let's talk about his perspective here. He's the president of the United States. He comes up with this plan for peace. It's called the 14 points. And part of that plan included, no more secret treaties, no more, secret alliances with other countries, right? Because you don't want to be conducting business in the shadows. It makes you look shady. It creates tension between countries. And this is sort of what led up to World War I. Also, self-determination by nations. You get the ability to decide upon your own government. So democracy or democratic countries can't really intervene in that case. And he wants to create an association of nations. So in this case, it's going to be the League of Nations. We have something different now, the UN, but this was kind of like the first draft of this, meaning like the Association of Nations or the League of Nations was his idea, and it's going to be a group of nations that come together as a forum to resolve international affairs. But along with this international association of countries, that would also have or require countries to dedicate military support in the event they need to intervene in a particular international event. Okay, so this is going to be part of what makes the 14 points in the League of Nations somewhat difficult. France and Great Britain, however, again, they want to harshly punish Germany. Okay, so notice it's not really on Woodrow Wilson's agenda because they felt like Germany was really the aggressor in World War I. They want reparations or cash to pay for war damages in their countries. So remember I said this war is a little different. It's coming to people's backyards. So it's really coming into their homes. And so there's a lot of damage in France and Great Britain. And they want reparations to pay for the war, to pay, for the money that they had invested in the war. And they want to increase national security, which would really, what this means is they want to weaken Germany so Germany cannot rise up against either of them again. Right? So when they agree on the Treaty of Versailles, they do create the League of Nations, right? We'll see later on, we'll read about this, that the United States doesn't join. So we'll talk about that later. The United States really felt as a whole that they didn't want to get dragged into another international conflict. And so this is why the United States doesn't actually join. And that's not necessarily Woodrow Wilson's decision. They place restrictions on Germany. So there's a couple of things that really harshly punish Germany, which Woodrow Wilson really tried to warn France and Britain about. He was like, let's not build, a treaty built on quicksand, meaning something that's not going to last. We want permanent, long-lasting peace. So harshly punishing Germany is only going to leave them feeling bitter. Unfortunately for France and Great Britain, they don't really take that into consideration. And so the result with the Treaty of Versailles is that it ends up really harshly punishing and embarrassing Germany to the point where they're incredibly weakened and they end up going into an economic depression as well. So this is going to kind of segue us again into World War II, but they pretty much restrict Germany's military down to like a minimal police force. Okay, so like you have to demobilize or mobilize most of your military. They lose some territory, right? So remember, Germany had just unified as a country too. So they lose some territory, and they also have to sign this guilt clause in the Treaty of Versailles that says that they take sole responsibility for the war. Okay, so and that puts the responsibility for the costs of the war on Germany as well. So again, these reparations payments that Germany is going to make, they're going to have to make them to France and Great Britain. But remember that they've been investing in the war for just as long as these other countries have, so they're probably in debt as well. So they have to kind of rebuild their own country and also pay to help rebuild others. So this is what's going to put Germany into debt. Okay, so the result of the Treaty of Versailles, which, by the way, if you hadn't picked up, Versailles, right, the Palace of Versailles in France that Louis XIV built. This is where they signed the treaty in the Hall of Mirrors. But this is one of the political cartoons that you may have seen already. But this is Germany, right, kind of in the corner like a punished child, and you'll see that he's depicted as naked because he's been literally stripped of everything. He's embarrassed. And then you'll see these other powers, right? France, Great Britain, the United States walking out of this meeting, kind of looking at him. But it's, again, depicting Germany as ashamed and stripped as a child. And you'll see the peace treaty here at his feet because he's had to agree to a lot of these terms that are very unfair. Okay, so the effects of the Treaty of Versailles and the war is that we have a peace built on quicksand, and we're going to look more closely at the clauses in the Treaty of Versailles. And so the U.S. doesn't actually sign the treaty because, again, like these are things that the U.S. really disagreed with. They also don't join the League of Nations. This is why they also don't sign or join the League of Nations, because they don't sign the treaty. They don't agree to the terms in which the war is ended. Germany is left feeling bitter towards the Allies. And a lot of other allies, like Japan, don't get the land that they were hoping to get. So they were disregarded. They don't really get rewarded or get the spoils of war, which again is going to leave Japan a little upset. And this is going to explain a lot of their behavior when they're imperializing leading up to World War II. Okay, and the League of Nations is basically powerless. They don't really have a good military force. Most of the time, the League of Nations doesn't take actions when it should. And so the League of Nations is going to be unsuccessful, which is why it's done away with later on, and we're going to have the UN replace it. So the cost of the war, millions of dollars, millions of soldiers. And we call this the lost generation because a lot of men die fighting this war, right? Only to lead up to another great war a few years later. So you can see, like, here's the Triple Entente military. And again, I said this war is coming into people's backyards. So you'll see civilians, right, that have also perished due to warfare as well, because it came into major cities where people were living. So it's not just the military that we're looking at. We're also looking at innocent people who weren't necessarily involved in fighting. And also you can see the Central Powers, right? This is the number of deaths, and you can see the total here at the bottom, 16,543,185 deaths. And again, another little comparison for you so you can see World War I military deaths. And again, Russia, even though it had pulled out of the war, also suffered greatly as well. So here are the Entente, or the Allied powers, military deaths. And then you can also see from the Central Powers, right? And again, Germany being one of the major powers on that side, over half of the casualties. All right, so this is going to end our notes on World War I. But what you guys are going to look at now is warfare in World War I, and then we're going to look at the consequences of the Treaty of Versailles later.